Imagine this. Hello, dear citizens of Earth. There are many rumors that I am in reality a reptilian being. Those rumors, of course, are totally true. And I apologize for all the trouble caused and hope you can forgive me. This is what happened in Korea in the year 2016. Not precisely that, but something of the very same magnitude. For years there were many rumors that the Korean president was a member of a shamanistic death cult, and that not the president, but actually 8 goddesses were ruling the country. Even US diplomats wrote that the cult had complete control over Park's body and soul. Crazy conspiracy talk, right? And then this happened.
We begin at the nation's top office. President Park Geun-hye has offered her deepest apologies to the Korean public regarding the latest scandal. It involves documents that she passed to her former aide Choi Soon-sil.
Now the scandal broke open last night when Korean TV station JTBC reported that the president's longtime aide Choi Soon-sil seemed to have received and edited some of the president's speeches before the events for which the speeches were designated.
저의 선거 운동이 국민들에게 어떻게 전달되는지에 대해 개인적인 의견이나 소감을 전달해주는 역할을 하였습니다.
For Americans, imagine if the State of the Union speech was actually written by a known death cult. But in Korea it did not stop with speeches. That said cult was directly controlling the president. The cult has groomed the future presidents since her formative years. Now it was telling her what policies to enforce, how to write tax laws, and what charities should not be looked closer into. Even telling her what dress to wear and what handbag to carry. Through this president, it was the cult that was shaping Korea's present and future. But it did not end there. Hello and welcome to the Vital Red Pill. Today we are going for a very wild ride. Death cults, puppies, competitive horse dancing, and the 8 goddesses of South Korea. Disclaimer, I tried to fact check as much as I could, but it's a fucked up story that only gets worse the deeper I look into it. I often had to take breaks just because things were getting depressingly dark, even for me. And because it's an insane story the world had completely ignored. At least that part we shall change now. The story I'm going to tell you is generally like from a good Hollywood spy movie. Let's start from the very beginning. Park Geun-hye was born as one of 4 children of an ambitious Korean man who 11 years later became the 3rd president/military dictator of South Korea. As her parents were busy running the country, and being the daughter of the president meant that she was not allowed to live a normal life. In 1974, her mother was killed during an assassination attempt on her father. It was in that time that the cult leader approached her, using his charms and persuasion techniques to slowly brainwash Park. The back then 22-year-old Park took over her mother's role of the First Lady in all official matters. For 5 years, she experienced political events from the front seat. During that time, the cult leader's daughter and the future president became good friends. Then, in 1979, 5 years later, Park's father was assassinated by his very own chief of intelligence. The head of the Korean CIA had shot the Korean president. I told you it's a crazy story. The following inquirers concluded even back then that the cult leader used his close ties to the president's family for great monetary gains. According to some sources, the assassin, who was a very good friend of the president, claimed that one of his motives for the assassination was that the president did not protect his daughter from the corrupting influence of the cult leader. So, in other words, the assassin feared that the cult could grow in importance and potentially take over Korean politics from within. From what we know now, he was entirely right. But his actions only postponed the inevitable. Park, who had now lost both parents due to assassinations, had nobody left protecting her from the cult's influence. The leader of the cult is often referred to as the Korean Rasputin, because same as the original Russian Rasputin, he uses his spiritual-fueled charisma to influence politics in his favor. The Korean Rasputin died aged 82 in the year 1994. Only 4 years later, Park decided to go into politics, where she successfully rose in the ranks. The daughter of the cult leader was always at her side during these times as her spiritual advisor. In 2013, Park then became the first female Korean president, and, according to Forbes back then, the 11th most influential female in the world. But this is when the story gets dark, really dark. Not 1 year later, a ferry boat carrying hundreds of Korean students sank mere 2 miles from the coastline. Almost 300 students died that day. I remember having seen this in a German news back then. The whole event was very strange, as, according even to this YouTube comment, the whole crew acted irrationally. The captain constantly told the students to remain in their cabins. Everybody could have been saved easily, but almost 300 died. Later, it turned out that the captain was also a member of a shamanistic death cult, and the whole event was very likely a blood sacrifice ritual of sorts. The owner of the ferry company also committed suicide in the most obscure way during that day. And while the ship was sinking and the main headline news of all Korean media, the president was nowhere to be found, because she was having a meeting with the cult leader's daughter behind closed doors.
Shifting focus, prosecutors investigating former President Park Geun-hye's infamous missing 7 hours during the 2014 Sewol-ho ferry sinking have found that she waited to get advice from her close confidant before holding the first emergency meeting on the disaster. Our Kim Hyo-sun with the latest.
It's been found that former President Park Geun-hye consulted with her confidant Choi Soon-sil on how to deal with the sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry in April 2014. Prosecutors striving to solve the so-called 7-hour mystery about what Park did while the ferry sank in waters of the nation's southwest coast have found that Choi was called into the presidential office and held a meeting with Park as well as her close aides. The investigation also shows Park only left for the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters after Choi suggested she did so. She arrived at the headquarters at around 5 p.m., some 7 hours after the golden time for a rescue operation.
Rumors go so far as to claim that the whole sacrifice was done in order to resurrect, most likely, the now-dead cult leader, as the memorial speech President Park gave after the ferry accident contains the words reborn and noble sacrifice. Keep in mind that the speeches were not written by her but by the cult leader's daughter. But there are way more occult things happening in Korea. An ex-president threw himself off an old cliff. According to the official story, his death note was found written on a computer in a document file where he asked that his body should be cremated as soon as possible and that no autopsy should be performed. That sounds more than fishy. Later, that same president is transformed from a corrupt politician into a saint with the help of the media for political reasons. Also related are recent news where a Korean cult purposely helped to spread the coronavirus by letting infected Koreans avoid quarantine and thus enabling them to spread the virus to as many people as possible, or something like that. The fuck is happening in Korea? When the news broke that the president admitted being a puppet of the cult, first thousands, then hundred thousands, and finally millions of Koreans went to the streets, peacefully. But have you ever heard of that? This event was ignored by almost all media worldwide. Those agencies that reported on it mostly only mentioned that some Koreans are protesting some corrupt president, yada yada, nothing new here. The fact that the leader of one of the world's top 20 countries, the Forbes #1 most influential woman in the world, was literally a Manchurian candidate cult puppet got no media attention at all. Why? Because during these times, these were the main headlines worldwide.
They control what you hear and what you don't hear. What is covered, how it's covered, even if it's covered at all. Sometimes I'll have like these great events and it won't be covered.
While the whole world was looking at the Hillary versus Trump show,
because you'd be in jail.
Korea impeached its presidential puppet and sentenced her to 25 years in prison. Luckily, some Korean guys on the chance documented those crazy happenings at the time. And it was this very screen cap that has led me to create this video you see now. But what about puppies and horse riders? As you would have guessed by now, naturally, it was these two elements that started the whole downfall of the cult. Because, obviously, this story was not weird enough yet. So, the cult leader's daughter was friends with a wealthy fashion designer. He was her 20-year younger toy boy. This fashion designer's expensive luxury handbags one day appeared in the hands of President Park. A great marketing success for his brand. But then one day the cult leader's daughter asked him to take care of her puppy dog for a while. When she came back a short while later, the fashion guy was out playing golf and left the puppy unattended for a few hours. This sparked an outrage in the cult leader's daughter that surely lasted many minutes and was very loud and ugly and so on. Her overreaction and the fact that, quote, she treated me like a slave, swearing at me many times, end quote, then caused him to look closer into this cult lady's actions. He wanted to retaliate against her, so he started to gather data, look at who she and her associates were in contact with. Real detective work. He wanted to hit her where it hurts. She grew up in a wealthy environment, and being the daughter of the cult leader gave her a lot of power. And that's why she behaved as if she was the queen of the whole country. She forced a prestigious university to create a scholarship for competitive horse dancing. Of course, her daughter was the first recipient of that scholarship, even though she wasn't even good at it. Nobody dared to stand in the way of the cult, and I guess many have heard rumors of what happened when one does. Maybe Korea's record-high suicide numbers are partly influenced by this cult, as many powerful people end up suiciding in forests or jump off old cliffs, and the police has learned to rather declare their suicide than to look into it. Anyhow, the young horse rider won some competitions because she was the only one attending, or in other events where she did not win, the organizers lost their jobs shortly after. Literary fairy tale-like spoiled princess behavior. The cult also uses influence to make sure that the same young lady could take part in a type of Asian Olympic Games.